Well, start with a little bit of background. When I was 7 years old, living in England, where I'm from, my mother started studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. And if you know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses, anything to do with spirit contact is considered demonic. So I grew up with that, idea in mind, so that contact with spirits was scary and demon possessed. When my daughter was probably about 14, I think, she was a young teenager, she came home with a Ouija board, and that really scared me. And we had a big fight about it, especially since she started doing some automatic writing. And I'm going to show you the little piece that I have saved all these years. We're talking about, 30 some years ago. And she said that she had just put her fingertip basically on a pencil, and that this writing started being produced by a spirit that identified itself as Zolf. So that, was like my first introduction to automatic writing. But later, when I got kicked out of the organization on my 35th birthday, because they said I was obviously a danger to the congregation, which I now wear as a badge of honor, and I went to my first psychic and got a psychic reading. I started studying the tarot, and guess what? I didn't get struck by lightning. But because I got kicked out of the organization, my mother doesn't speak to me. My niece doesn't speak to me. In fact, a few years ago, my mother lives about 100 miles away from me. And I called her a few years ago and I said, I haven't seen you in a long time. I'm going to be out your way. I'd like to come by and see you. And she said, do you still have those tarot cards? And I said, well, I wasn't going to bring any tarot cards to see you. They won't be in the car. And she said, it doesn't matter. You still have the demons. And I said, well, if I have the demons, why don't they ever bother me? And she said, because they're very clever. Which, that's an organization who, a direct quote from their literature is, brothers, we would not want to engage in independent thinking. So I'm very grateful to be out of that group. My daughter, in 1999, she met a man who was a federal agent, and they immediately fell in love and moved in together. And because what you do when your mom is a handwriting analyst, you get a new boyfriend, you bring the handwriting, of course. Well, what I saw in Tom's handwriting was very disturbing. And I told her there was the potential for explosive behavior. And a lot of, we talked about, the three of us talked about the difficulties that there would be in that relationship, and, how if they were going to do it, because she was 27, so it wasn't like she was a young kid. She made her own choices, as she always did. But we talked about the problems and how maybe they could get around them. But as usual, she didn't listen. And less than a year later, he killed her and himself. And that was my entree into an interest in the spirit world. For obvious reasons, I wanted to know what happened in life after Earth, because as we know, there's no death. And I've learned that. And I've had the great good fortune to be picked out of a crowd by John Edward, and James Van Prague came to my house and taped one of his shows, and I knew that it was my daughter Jennifer who arranged that. So that's how I got interested in it. And last year, let me backtrack and say I started meditating and, really getting going in spiritual learning. And then I got really sick. After Jennifer was killed, it was when my first book came out, and I went on a book tour, and I was going to 10 different states and traveling a lot and hosting conferences. And when I stopped, I got really sick with mononucleosis. And after that, I had a lot of trouble getting back into meditating, and I just sort of let it lay for a long time. But last year, some things happened that made me feel like I was being led on a path back into spirituality. And one of the things I'd like to share with you here is, if you can see it, can you see the face in this rock? Yeah. I had this rock for 10 years, never looked at it. It sat in a basket in my living room. And one day, I decided, for no good reason, to move it to another location. And I was standing next to it, and I happened to look down, and that's what I saw. And to me, that was some kind of a sign. I wasn't sure exactly what, but it seemed to mean something. And then some other things happened too. And that happened right when I was going to my first AREI symposium, which I really enjoyed a lot. And at the end of the symposium, everybody was together, and Craig said, who is interested in joining a regional Zoom group for, different types of studies? And I put my hand up. And the next thing I knew, I was a group leader. So be careful if you put your hand up when Craig is around, because I just thought I'd be a part of the meeting. So having said all that, I have been a handwriting analyst for 51 years now. I started studying in high school when my boyfriend's mother had read a book and got me interested. I became court qualified as a handwriting expert in 1985, and there are two areas of handwriting analysis that we're going to just cover. We can only cover it very lightly today, but let me start by sharing screens with you, because we're going to talk about a lot of different things. I have 3 screens, so I have to be careful that I'm sharing the right one. Okay, and slideshow. Now, I need somebody to tell me, are you seeing 1 slide or 2?
2.
Okay, then I need to switch this. How about now?
That 1.
Okay, we're good. So, there are several applications for handwriting analysis, and I work in all of them. There's personality assessment from your handwriting. There's handwriting authentication in cases where, forgery, where you need to know whether or not somebody wrote something, not always just forgery, as we're going to see. And one called Grapho-therapy. And it's some of the Grapho-therapy exercises that we're going to use to hopefully facilitate opening up. And this is just something that I'm starting to use, and the Zoom group there's several members here today. Some of them have used it and reported back that they felt that it was helpful. So let's first talk about what makes handwriting unique. And the fact is that personality develops over time, and handwriting does too. And handwriting, your handwriting probably doesn't look the same as it did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because you grow and change, and your handwriting changes over time too, to reflect the changes in you. It reflects our life experiences, genetics, and the environment too. It shows your mental and emotional state. Also has to do, physiology changes your handwriting. It can change over age, as I've already said. Illness, like for instance, Parkinson's is one very obvious illness that shows up in handwriting. There are many different kinds of illnesses that show up. If you have an accident, if you break your arm or your wrist, obviously that's going to make a difference to your handwriting. And even when you're tired, the handwriting tends to droop down, and the baseline, the line that you write on, will fall downwards. If you're taking medications or recreational drugs, those things all have an effect. Even one beer can make an effect on handwriting. And then there are the external factors, the writing conditions. So your handwriting is going to look different. Excuse me. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. The materials that you write with, the pen and the paper, the writing position. If you're writing on a table, on a flat surface, your handwriting is going to look somewhat different than if you're sitting on the bed with a magazine on your lap. holding it on your knees, or if you're writing, you have a pad of paper on somebody's back and you're writing. All of those things make a difference. So handwriting can be authenticated. That is, we can tell who wrote something in most cases for several reasons. First of all, the axiom is that no two people write exactly alike. It's like your fingerprints. We have how many? 8 billion people in the world, and every one of them has individual, unique fingerprints. Handwriting is unique in the same way. And a study was done through the post office to prove this. It's not just what handwriting analysts say. Also, no individual signs their name exactly the same way twice. So if you see an identical signature, 2 identical signatures, one of them is a fake. It just cannot be done. So we have class characteristics versus individual characteristics. And what that means is when you're in school, usually in 3rd grade, although we don't even talk about what's going on with schools these days, that's another whole topic. But you learn everybody in the class learns to write a certain way. They all learn to write the same way. And then as you get familiar with the writing, you start by learning a letter at a time. So that's letter impulse. You write one letter. Then you get comfortable with that and you string it together in whole words. Then you're writing in word impulse. And then you are comfortable doing that and you write in whole sentences. And once you're doing that, we say that you have reached writing maturity because you're bringing in your individual characteristics. You're making the handwriting your own. And as you do that, you form master patterns for each of the letters. So that would be like, so let's say the letter A. You may write an A differently at the beginning of the word than you do at the middle or the end of a word. But each of the ways that you make that letter A is your master pattern for that letter. And of course, you do that for all the alphabet. Now, because nobody writes exactly the same way, we say that they have a range of variation. And that means some people are very consistent in the way that they write. They write, the same, very similarly every time. And other people have numerous styles. So in determining whether somebody actually wrote something or not, as a document examiner, I have to establish their range of variation. And we do that by looking at their various writing habits. And there are thousands of variables, but they basically boil down into space, which is the way the writing is arranged on the page, how much space is left between the letters, the words, the lines, the margins. So that's a spatial arrangement. And by the way, the space is very important. It's probably the most important aspect of writing because it's unconscious. If we had to stop and think about how much space to leave between each word and letter and line, then, the communication would be impossible because it would take forever. Form is the most conscious part of handwriting, and that's the way the writing looks. It would be equivalent of the font that you choose on your computer. So it's the letter design, and it includes things like how you connect the letters or how much you connect them, or do you break in between. The initial strokes, the start of, on the beginnings of words, the end strokes, the capital letters. And then there's movement, which is the most complex part of handwriting because it involves rhythm and speed and pressure and the bass line and all that sort of thing. And then finally, the other stuff, which includes numbers and punctuation. If I'm looking at, let's say, an anonymous note, the first thing I'm going to see to compare is, are there any misspellings or grammatical anomalies that appear in the known writing? Because you have to compare the questioned writing to the known writing to determine whether they're the same writer. So I'm looking at grammar and misspellings. I just looked at a signature that was in question, and the first thing I noticed was that the signature, the name was spelled wrong. So that's a big clue right there. Patching is when you go back and you try to fix something and make it look better. Usually it makes it look worse. And tremor, this is going to be really important in a moment. Tremor can be a facet of illness, especially Parkinson's and illnesses that involve movement, body movement. But tremor can also appear, it's one of the primary indicators of forgery, because when somebody forges or tries to simulate somebody else's name, they have to do two very difficult things. Wow, scared me. First of all, you got those master patterns that I just talked about, you have to set those aside, the things that make you write the way you do, and then you have to take on the master patterns of the person whose handwriting you're trying to simulate. So it's a very difficult thing to do. Now let's look at a case here. And this is, I'm sure you're all familiar with the skull experiment, and Robin Foy gave me his blessing to use this example. It's on their website. Thomas Edison's initials, Thomas Alva Edison, TAE. And during the skull experiment, which took place over 5 years in a village in England, and this was witnessed by members of the Society for Psychical Research. They placed a reel of unexposed film on the table, and the people that they call the communicators from the other side transmitted the images to it. This is in 1997. So one of the images, there were others, but one of the images was this TAE here. So they found an initials of Thomas Edison to compare to it. And then for this presentation, I went on the internet and found 2 more examples, because you can't establish a range. You can look at 2 writings and say they're similar or not, but you can't establish a range of variation unless you have several different ones. So you could see how many different ways that he wrote. So here's what we found. This is, I think you can see my arrow. This is the one that they found when Edison was 62 in 1925. So this was 72 years later that they got this image on film. And these 2 are other examples. So you can see he had a fairly wide range of variation in the way he wrote. But this film, it fits very well within that range of variation. And what's even more impressive is that it's written very smoothly and without hesitation. So that's important. And the skullexperiment.com will show you more about that. And then Robin Foy has a new organization, a Spiritual Science Foundation, so that's here. I'll send this presentation to Wendy if she wants to distribute it. Marcus Lang, who I have seen on the Facebook page, on the AREI page, posted some writing the other day, and I didn't get a copy of it, but he said likewise that Spirit was impressing the writing on the page. And I just saw it quickly, but I noticed that it was that personality-wise, the writing was rather soft and kind of childlike. So I'd like to have a chance to look at that more. Okay, the other case that I want to talk about is Carl Sagan. And in this instance, this was an apport, I'm not sure the correct way of saying it. But this was from Gary Schwartz, Dr. Gary Schwartz, and he gave me his blessing to use this. And the story was that in 2014, he and his wife, Rhonda, attended the AREI symposium. He was a keynote speaker. And David Thompson was giving a seance that Gary and Rhonda were scheduled to attend. But about an hour before he was to leave, Gary decided that he wouldn't go because he was having back problems and he wanted to be in good shape for his talk the next day. During the seance, Carl Sagan appeared and gave messages specifically to Gary, and then his wife Rhonda received a small crumpled piece of paper in her hand. And later when this was done in full pitch black conditions, So when she opened it later, this is what she saw. And you can see the crumpled part of the paper here. This was something, I don't know what I took something out there, but that's why that's a white block. Gary was startled to see what had happened because 2 days earlier, he had, without telling anyone else, he had decided to include a slide in his presentation about the possibility of Dr. Sagan participating in afterlife research. And again, unbeknownst to anyone, including his wife, he had decided to do an experiment, a secret experiment. So in his head, he asked Dr. Sagan to make an appearance at the seance. So he asked me if I could authenticate this signature. So again, what we had to do is to look at a whole bunch of other signatures, and I found some that I felt were, viable. And this again is, on this side, is the Carl Sagan ported signature. So the first obvious thing about it is that there's a lot of tremor in it. Now, we're not suggesting that this is a forgery in any way, but the question is, what's the impact of a spirit writing, signing his name? We don't know. You also have to look at the effects of illness, and Carl Sagan he died after a 2-year battle with a disease, I can't think now, but he actually died of pneumonia when he was 62. So we don't know how he was writing at the time that he died. But overall, this is a very similar writing. One big difference is the space between the words. But again, not knowing the effect of a spirit writing and assuming that the spirit wrote and didn't just impress the writing on the paper like in the other instance or like on the film, I had to end up saying that this was inconclusive. And I hate doing that, but that happens in about 25% of cases. Now let's talk about automatic writing. Why do it? Well, some people want to develop their clairvoyance or some of the other clairs. Maybe want to get answers from the higher self or seek guidance from the spirit world. So those are all good reasons to do automatic writing. And over the course of this year, I think we've had 16 meetings. We meet in the Zoom group, the Automatic Writing Mediumship group. We meet on the first and third Wednesday of each month at 5:30 Pacific time, and whatever other times you have. And we talk about what we've been doing. We don't always talk about automatic writing. We talk about all the spiritual things that we've been experiencing and doing. But we've learned some things in our discussions, and that is, most importantly, automatic writing doesn't mean just one thing. It can mean spirit moving the hand. That's what I thought I was going to experience when I tried it. Because, I just assumed, because everything I'd read before had been spirit, takes hold of your hand and writes. It made me think of when I had a hypnosis session with someone, and she had my left hand on the table, and she had me looking away from it while she talked to me. And as she talked, she kept saying something about lifting and rising. And I thought my hand stayed on the table, but when she had me look, it was up in the air. So something took over my arm and moved it. Or, my mental process did that, and I wasn't aware of it. That's what I was assuming automatic writing was. But we found that it's also can be inspired writing, and some of our group members do spirit dictation. It can be handwritten, or it can be on a keyboard. So there's lots of different aspects. Oh, now I'm going to show you, this is the writing that my daughter got using her Ouija board. And here is her handwriting at that time. So you can see that it was quite different. And that's one of the things that I look at in automatic writing, is the writing to determine whether it's from your higher self or from an outside influence. And so it's like when I do cases of multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, as it's now called. I have to look and see is this written by a completely separate personality? So here is a dictated writing. And I think her name is Vasula. I'm assuming. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. But she's a woman who says that from the age of 6, she had waking dreams and nightmares that she thought were from Satan trying to kill her. And when she was around 10 to 12, she started having waking dreams of a spiritual marriage with Jesus Christ and the Virgin Mary looking on. Later in her teens, she says she was surrounded by the dead asking for her help. She didn't practice any particular religion. She married, had kids, divorced, married again. In 1985, she was living in Bangladesh, and she was writing out a grocery list when she said, read what it says on her Wikipedia page. She suddenly experienced a light electrical feeling in her right hand, and at the same time, an invisible presence. She was unable to open her hand nor lift her arm. She was not afraid, but the hand guided her to write a line in handwriting that she felt was very different from her own. She says she's also received messages from the devil and evil presence. So when I look at this writing, I must tell you that it's not one that I would have pegged for a spiritual writing. It has, however, very tall upper loops, which are mental processes and spirituality. It's a reaching up for spirituality. But it's very rigid. It's extremely controlled. Now, there's a line of her writing at the bottom here, and then I'm going to show you another sample of her writing. See, she writes a question and then gets the answer that's dictated. But this is a very unusual writing for spirit dictation. On the other hand, this is Elsa Barker, who one of the ARI members suggested that I use, Dennis Grega. And Elsa Barker, as I looked her up, was an American from Vermont who worked as a shorthand writer, which I assume would be a stenographer. She was a teacher. She wrote for newspapers. She wrote books. And in World War I, she was in Paris, and she felt compelled to write a passage. She didn't know where it came from, and it was signed with an X. Later, she learned that the signature X was the nickname of a judge, David P. Hatch, who had lived and died in Los Angeles. And she later published 3 books of his writings. I couldn't find any of the writings that he did through her. So this is a sample of her own writing. And this is much more like what I would consider thinking of as a spiritual writing, because it's flexible, it's open, it's extremely fluid. And it also has the tall upper loops, but not extreme. And it's quite balanced. It's a really dynamic writing. And so it would make sense that a spirit would write through somebody like this. Okay, so this is an enlargement of it. This morning, I received this from Wendy, and it was sent by John Finnemore, who I'm sorry, I don't know, but I looked up. He had said that Michael Flagg was the founder of the Universal Spiritual Brother and Sisterhood, and that he was transcribing a tape recording of a sitting that he had with spirit friends. So again, this is, I assume, not a writing from spirit, but this is the transcription. And here, like Elsa Barker, it's a very open, fluid, flexible writing, and has strong spiritual aspects to it. Now, I don't know how many times this was copied, because each time you copy something, it gets thicker. So the thickness, if that's called the ductus, the line of writing, the ink line, if it really is this thick, it shows somebody who is very sensual, in touch with their concrete senses, who really appreciates things like yeah, fine wine maybe, and beautiful music and strong taste and things like that. This is a case of automatic writing that I just picked off the internet. It's a prayer. And I think this is fairly common, that the writing just runs all together because you're writing so quickly that there's no time to pick up the pen. Now, here's another one that I got. But if you get one like this, immediately stop, because there's so much anger and frustration in these strokes. And of course, I don't know if they say anything that makes sense. I can't read it. But this would, if you're getting a spirit that has this kind of energy, I would back out. Finally, I'm going to show you mine. Wait a second, I want to go back. Oh, okay. So I thought it was only fair to show my little feeble effort, and this is not automatic writing, but it is, I think, a form of spirit dictation, and it's my normal handwriting, except that it's a lot wavier and less controlled. I don't have a very controlled writing, but this is way out of control, where, I felt like I was in a meditative state, and these were the words that were coming into my mind. So now we're going to talk about Grapho-therapy. And this is what we're going to use to open up and hopefully open a channel. So some of the benefits to normal Grapho-therapy that we're going to use are that it helps to focus and concentrate the brain. Like if you need to be more organized, Grapho-therapy is a really good way to do that. Although there will be different exercises than what I'm going to show you today. It helps to reduce cognitive distortions, which would be like, let's say you walk out to your car and a bird flies overhead and bombs you, and you say, that always happens to me. Well, obviously it doesn't always happen to you. That's a cognitive distortion. Or you do something that you made a mistake and you say, oh, I'm so stupid. That's not true. It made a mistake. So cognitive distortions. Grapho-therapy also helps to relax the mind and make you more open to spirit. It works because cognition, the idea, anchored to movement, which is the Grapho-therapy exercises, will facilitate change. And behaviors, again, that's the writing movement, help to anchor the change. And then if you also associate positive statements or affirmations with the handwriting movement, that will make them last longer. Dr. Norman Deutsch wrote a couple of wonderful books on brain plasticity. And the first one was The Brain That Changes Itself, and it really explains why Grapho-therapy works without calling it that. And you find that if you do these things, that they've discovered that it results in actual changes to brain function. So here, there are a few steps to prepare for the automatic writing. You want a private environment. You don't want to be disturbed. You know how it is when you're meditating. You want to be in a place where there's not a lot of noise. Also, what you write with, your writing materials. I have a lined notebook. You may just write on blank paper. So it depends what you want, but it should be kept in a place where nobody else can get to it unless you want them to. You want to be seated comfortably, preferably at a table or a desk, or you can have a lap desk, whatever's comfortable, but where you can move your arm, because if a spirit does move your arm, it may make large arm movements because they're controlling it, not you. In regular Grapho-therapy, lined paper or graph paper is best because you're trying to be very regular in the way you write. For automatic writing, it doesn't matter. Using music is good. Grapho-therapy, Baroque music, and I've given a couple of examples here, but you could use angelic type music if you prefer, whatever helps you to relax. And we suggest that you start with a prayer of protection. One that I shared with the group that I got from Brian Hurst, who is a medium who studied with Leslie Flint, and I have had some readings with him, and he gave this prayer at the beginning, so I'll share it with you. Father, Mother God, we come here in the name of love, light, peace, and truth to seek contact with any friends, loved ones, family, or guides who have made the change called death. We ask that the power of the Holy Spirit uplift and protect each and every one of us as we attempt to make this very difficult act known as communication. And so we ask, spirit friends, draw near to me. Spirit friends, speak clear to me. Spirit friends, slow down your voices. When we hear, the heart rejoices. Give us glimpses of eternity. Help us know that you are free. Give us names and facts and places. Help us understand heaven's graces. Impress your thoughts upon us with emotion and simplicity. And having done that, you can go into a visualization or a meditation, something that's grounding, and then just start writing. Hold the pen lightly, don't grip it hard, just let go of thoughts. And we found that it's a good idea to ask questions and then see what the answers are. Some tips. Come to it without expectations. Don't ask yes or no questions. Let it be free-flowing thought. Don't evaluate what you're writing at the time you're writing it. Wait, maybe look at least an hour after you've written it, maybe longer. It's a good idea to practice it daily. They say it takes 3 weeks to form a habit. Do it at the same time each day to form that habit. And you can try it with your non-dominant hand. Sometimes that works. It just helps you shift out of your left brain into the right brain. And make it fun. If you're afraid, it's going to impede it. And always remember to say thank you to the spirits who come through. I've included some affirmations that were from Sanaya Roman, who channels Orion. And these are good ones to use, or you can come up with your own. And finally, some of the exercises. And I have chosen 4 of the relaxing exercises here that you can try right now if you want. You can do them on paper, or you can do them with your arm in the air. And here's just some little music clips. The first one is called Ellie's because it looks like E-L-L-E, and you just make the loops higher and higher. The relaxing exercises are different from the ones that wake up the brain. These are more, putting the brain into a peaceful state. So here's the music that I chose for this one. Whoops. Hopefully you can hear that. Okay. Then this one here is Effie's for obvious reasons. E-F-E-F. And the music. Oops. Oh, I just screwed up. Let me go back. Okay. Now you're probably back to the wrong thing. Here. Okay, then this one, I don't have a name for it, but it looks to me like octopuses. And finally, the propeller, which looks like an infinity symbol on its side. Okay, so you do the exercises for 5 minutes or however long you want, and relax your mind and just see what happens. Any questions or comments? Everybody still with me?
We are indeed. Just put your hand up if you have a question. Thank you. Angelique first.
Hi, Sheila. Thank you very much. It was a very beautiful lecture, very interesting. There was one thing that, however, a bit troubled me because I have very different experience with what you call maybe an aggressive spirit. From my experience, and I haven't been into mediumship or psychic work not very long, for 7 years now, and I never encountered any aggressiveness with spirit. My experience until now has been that whenever there is a question of aggression, it is always coming from the subconsciousness of the person who is working with it. So I wonder, what is your experience? Because for myself, I don't believe in evil spirits. Do you understand my question?
I do, and I don't have an answer for you, but maybe somebody else who, with more experience within that area does. I am, you know, some of the British mediums say you don't need a prayer of protection, and it's just your intention. And then other people I've heard say you always need a prayer of protection, and if it's from your own self, if the aggression is from your own self, I don't know why you would need a prayer. So I don't have an answer. Well, Craig, what do you think?
Yeah, there definitely are in various varieties. One of them is earthbounds. Others are those negative spirits who have never been human. So they are around, but if you have a higher spiritual purpose, then they won't bother you. So in other words, that's the reason the mediums don't have these lower level entities come through. And if you begin with a prayer of protection, which states your intention, puts you on a higher spiritual level, and you are doing it for spiritual reasons, not for a parlor game, then you shouldn't have any trouble with worrying about them. But the prayer of protection is important mostly for your own intention, and it sets your own intention. It sets you on a spiritual level where you want to be. But we haven't had anybody who's had any real difficulties with them among the mediums and physical mediums. And so that is because of the fact that we're on a higher spiritual plane.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sally, you had a question.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry. So yeah, I was curious because my background is partly in public education, and you did mention slightly something about education. And the fact that children are no longer being taught to write with flowing cursive, a script, because so many are keyboarding now. How does that impact what you do as a writing analysis person?
Yeah, it's not really accurate to say children are not being taught, because in 19 states there is a requirement now to teach cursive writing. Whether it's being enforced or not, I don't know. I'm the president of the American Handwriting Analysis Foundation, and we have a campaign for cursive. And we've worked with some legislators, and I gave a talk, a Zoom kind of talk at the Oklahoma State Legislature Education Committee or something, and to explain why it's so important for children to continue to learn to write. It really has an impact on the brain.
Right.
So I think that
I've even had, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't think handwriting will ever go away, and I think everything cycles and it's coming back.
Right. But my own children were really only ever taught print because they were expected to keyboard. I know that at a college level class, I had a previous professor who just claimed that she had a student who claimed she couldn't do her assignment because she couldn't read the original documentation the handwritten cursive documentation, that was her source material. And so I'm glad to hear that there is at least some push to keep that going. But it's really disappeared quite heavily, at least in the public education systems that I've been involved with.
Yeah, it started with the Common Core.
Right. Well, they don't test handwriting.
They took out the requirement to teach it, too.
Right.
So anybody who is interested in helping with that cause can go to cursiveiscool.com, and it'll tell you different things that you can do to help.
Okay, thanks.
That's great.
Thank you. Any other questions? Peter Sparks.
Oh yeah. How you doing? All right, thanks for that, Sheila. That's lovely. Just a quickie. As I've got older, I've tended to stop handwriting even before I got to the computer stage, and do printing. Is there anything why I should do that? I mean, is it just laziness, or is it just? And can you read printing? Can you do the same with printing as with the handwriting?
Yeah, using the Gestalt method that I use, you can analyze any kind of handwriting.
Right.
Because it's graphic expression. And if you use, I describe the space, form, and movement. And I analyze, I have clients around the world, and so I analyze in handwritings that I cannot read, that are in different, and so printing falls into the same area. But why you started printing, you might want to look back and see what was going on in your life at that time, because it can sometimes have to, not always, but it can have to do with a loss in your life of some kind. And it's like breaking the bridges between yourself and your emotions and with other people. People who print, especially block printing, all capital printing, are much harder to get to know on an emotional level, because they may be friendly and outgoing, but they keep a lot to themselves. They're like an onion, peeling off the layers.
That's me, yeah. Thanks.
Sure. Any other questions?
I hope this, there was some useful information here. I know it's a little different than what we're used to hearing.
Sheila, it was absolutely fascinating. And of course, I think it's very, very important. As we said, those of us involved in physical mediumship will at some stage come across things that they want to authenticate, and they want to know what the basic principles are. And of course, for the automatic writing, I love their whole idea of how different it is from your own writing.
Right.
Somebody else got some questions.
The rest of the writing, the more you could say, excuse me, is what you see is what you get. But if the signature is very different from the rest of the writing, then the person shows a different self to the world. So just a signature is not really sufficient.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question. Brenda has a question.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, Sheila, do you have a website that that you give some pointers on?
I don't know if there's any pointers on it, but my name, SheilaLowe.com, is my handwriting website. I have two websites. The other one is, I write a mystery series about a handwriting expert, and that one is ClaudiaRoseSeries.com. So
Claudia Rose?
Claudia Rose Series. And there's a lot of handwriting analysis in some of the books, and people tell me they learn a lot about handwriting from just
All right, thank you.
And can you tell us about your books on handwriting, Sheila? The new one particularly looks fabulous.
Well, back in 2000, that book that I did the tour for after my daughter's death was The Complete Idiot's Guide to Handwriting Analysis. And that's been on the market for all these years. And recently it went out of print. So people were writing to me and saying, I really like that book and I want to have it. So I rewrote the book, I re-edited it, added some new samples. There's a lot of celebrity handwriting samples, and self-published it under a new name. And now it's called Reading Between the Lines, Decoding Handwriting. Decoding Handwriting. And it's available on Amazon in print and download copy. There's also advanced studies in handwriting psychology. which is a collection of monographs that I've written over the years about things like childhood sexual abuse seen in adult handwritings, addictive personality, serial killers, and stuff like that. And the third one is personality and anxiety disorders. And this is one that I offered for continuing education of marriage and family therapists in California. So now I put it into print form. So yeah, they're all on Amazon.